The boarding pass was torn right in front of her. The paper fluttered to the floor, spinning slowly, as if the entire cabin held its breath, witnessing the humiliation unfold. And before Ariana could even process what had just happened, a voice, sharp as a blade, sliced through the air. Brittany Cole, the flight attendant, snapped. "Step back. This area isn't for people like you. People like her." 3 simple words. Yet they carried the weight of a century of prejudice. The narrow cabin instantly transformed into a stage for a crushing silence. Passengers froze mid-step in the aisle. Eyes darted away. A few phones lifted discreetly. No one stepped in. No one asked questions. It was as if everything had been swallowed by the invisible power. Brittany was wielding the power of someone used to pointing, commanding, and suppressing. But Brittany didn't realize whose boarding pass she had just torn. No one in the cabin did. Only one person knew Ariana, and she remained silent. Silence is power. True power never needs to shout. Ariana Carter stood in front of the seat row, the soft amber light grazing her cheek tight from restraint. Her curly hair was tied back neatly. A black t-shirt, worn jeans, and a backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked no different from any ordinary passenger. No one could tell that behind the modest appearance was someone who ran an entire airline empire. A woman who owned intercontinental flight routes, fleets worth billions of dollars, someone whose press conference could shake the financial markets. But today, she wasn't a CEO. Today, she was just another anonymous traveler, and that made her silence more dangerous than any response. "This seat's been reassigned. Move to the back," Brittany said, her voice, cold as steel, her eyes, scanning Ariana with the disdain of someone viewing a disruption in her routine. Behind the polished exterior and professional smile was a gaze full of invisible priorities. Priorities Ariana knew all too well, the kind that always favored certain people, and never people who looked like her. Ariana held out her boarding pass. "I booked this seat 2 weeks ago." Brittany didn't bother glancing at it for more than a second. "Policy. Move back. No explanation, no reasoning, not even the basic courtesy a paying passenger deserved." An exasperated sigh came from a white man behind them. "How long are we going to wait here?" Brittany turned instantly, her attitude changing in a blink. "I'm terribly sorry, sir. We'll handle this right away." And that right away was executed by ripping up Ariana's boarding pass. The cabin stood still. No one spoke, not because they were surprised, but because they were used to it. A black woman being mistreated, nothing new. Nothing shocking. But today they picked the wrong woman. Ariana looked down at the torn paper at her feet. She didn't bend to pick it up. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't rage. Only her eyes changed. Something silently shifted, like steel girders locking in place before bearing a great weight. A sign that the storm wasn't coming from the noise, but from the silence. Passengers' cameras started to turn. The image of a woman being humiliated. A flight attendant abusing her power. A small moment, seemingly insignificant, but one that cracked the surface just enough to bring down an entire system. And the slap hadn't even happened yet, but everyone could feel it coming. Ariana took one step back, locking eyes with Brittany. No fear, no apology, just calm, measured observation. A kind of calm only the truly powerful possessed. "Are you sure?" Ariana asked, her voice, gentle as still water, but echoing like steel, clashing against steel. Brittany smirked. "I don't need to be sure. I'm the one in charge here." She didn't know. Who really held the authority? A young male attendant stepped forward, Carlos Rivera, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He had seen everything, understood everything, but was caught between conscience and protocol. She's right. The boarding pass was... Quiet, Carlos. Brittany snapped, her voice tightening. I've got this. Carlos looked at Ariana. An apologetic glance. A silent ally. There were always people like him, those who knew right from wrong, but the system kept them paralyzed. Ariana knew Carlos wasn't the problem. The problem was that people like Brittany were given unchecked power. Ariana stepped back again. But it wasn't the retreat of the weak. It was the calculation of someone planning a move. She noted every detail, Brittany's voice rising when speaking to her, lowering almost velvet when speaking to the white passenger, her defensive stance, the way her eyes flicked when she noticed someone was filming. The cabin split into two currents, those avoiding eye contact and those secretly watching. Ariana observed it all like a surveillance replay. That same skill had helped her build an airline. Now it recorded every moment with chilling clarity. She stayed silent. But inside was fire. A fire that didn't blaze. It simmered. Built. Compressed. Quiet power. The kind that doesn't make noise. Finally, Ariana bent down to pick up the torn boarding pass. She smoothed the edge, slow and deliberate, like analyzing evidence in a criminal case. Brittany saw this and snapped. You're wasting everyone's time. If you want to be on this flight, go to row 28. From a distance, someone whispered, she shouldn't be talked to like that. Another voice replied, just stay out of it. Ariana didn't argue. She didn't need to. Real strength isn't about winning a shouting match with someone full of bias. Real strength is letting the truth speak for itself. She stepped into the aisle. Each step a growing heartbeat, like the sound of war drums in the distance. Not loud, not chaotic, but unstoppable. As Ariana placed her backpack in the new seat, Carlos appeared and gently handed her a bottle of water. I'm sorry. That wasn't right. Ariana gave a small nod. I know. She didn't say more. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she was counting each misstep, counting each biased word, counting every detail as future evidence. Brittany thought she was humiliating a helpless passenger, but in reality, she was signing the end of her own career. Ariana looked out the window. The sky was painted in sunset gold. Her plane was getting ready for takeoff. No one knew the truth. No one knew the woman who had just been humiliated owned the very sky they were flying through. But the truth always lands at the right time, and the moment that slap hits the one that will shake the entire aviation industry is just a few hours away. Brittany stood blocking the aisle, her eyes glaring at Ariana lips, curled in a sneer that seemed to say, you don't belong here. Ariana stood tall, her cold gaze sweeping across the cabin, sensing every movement, every glance, every biased gesture. A heavy silence blanketed the air. No one intervened. No one reacted. Everyone seemed frozen in that moment of injustice. Ariana quietly observed every detail, logged every violation stored in her sharp memory, preparing for the inevitable power shift. Brittany stepped closer, her voice commanding, you need to move to the back now. Ariana didn't budge. She merely lifted the torn boarding pass from the floor, holding it like evidence. Her movements were slow but carried undeniable authority. The cabin tightened like a drawn bow. Passengers watched in silence, phones subtly raised to record. Carlos Rivera approached, placing a water bottle in Ariana's hand, his expression worried but restrained. Ariana nodded, saying nothing, taking a deep breath, her heartbeat steady, yet tense, feeling each second like a countdown to the eruption of power. Brittany thought she had the upper hand, but in reality, Ariana was watching, collecting, and preparing. Every action, every word, every glance was a piece of evidence, a data point. She didn't need to react immediately, because real power doesn't scream. It stays quiet, unseen, and when it finally erupts, it shakes the entire system. Ariana lifted her backpack, placing it in the correct spot, her eyes never leaving Brittany, watching every step, every gesture, recording it all. The cabin remained silent, heavy, and from that silence power was building. She stood firm, not trembling, not angry, just cold observant, waiting for the moment justice would be revealed. Brittany believed she was controlling the situation, but in truth, she was signing her own downfall. Ariana looked out the window, the evening sky soaked in shades of red and gold sunlight, casting a glow over the first-class cabin she owned, though no one knew it yet. Power was shifting quietly. The slap would come, but not yet. It would be thunder that echoed through the cabin, making everyone realize who truly held authority. Ariana sat out in a middle seat in the economy cabin, her eyes cold as they swept across the space. She didn't need to speak. Every detail was noted. Brittany's posture, the glances from surrounding passengers, the phones discreetly raised to record every crease on foreheads, every anxious breath. Brittany approached her voice, sharp and commanding. "You need to move to the back now." Ariana didn't move. She held the torn boarding pass, gently smoothing it out like she was analyzing a piece of evidence in a criminal investigation. The cabin stretched tight like a drawn wire, each passing second adding another layer of tension. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, his eyes filled with worry, but restrained, knowing that a single wrong move could shatter order and jeopardize everyone's careers. Ariana quietly watched Brittany, every gesture, every look, every move. Brittany felt in control, believing she was running the situation, unaware that Ariana was recording everything, with razor-sharp clarity, preparing for the moment real power would reveal itself. The passengers around them, drawn into the unfolding drama, had no idea that the woman being humiliated was the actual owner of the airline, the one who would flip the entire structure on its head. She placed her backpack on the seat beside her and shifted her gaze from Brittany to the cabin. Everyone saw her as just another traveler. No one knew the truth. Her silence was heavy, not out of fear, but from absolute control. A silence that only the truly powerful possess. No chaos, no reaction. But power was quietly forming, subtle but unstoppable. Brittany stepped closer, her voice raised sharp as a blade. "I'm telling you for the last time. Move to the back." Ariana simply lifted her hand, placing the torn boarding pass onto the tray table, gently smoothing it like she was handling a piece of incriminating evidence. The calmness of her gesture radiated force, causing Brittany to pause, her eyes meeting Ariana's but unable to speak further. The cabin was so tense that even the smallest sound rang out like the drumbeat of a coming storm. Carlos Rivera stepped forward, placing a bottle of water in Ariana's hand. His gaze silently conveyed both warning and support. Ariana nodded slightly, saying nothing. She inhaled deeply, her heartbeat slow, but pulsing with energy. Everything inside the cabin, the light, the space, the passengers, Brittany all became part of a strategic game of power. Ariana began to study Brittany's every move. She noticed Brittany lowering her voice when speaking to white passengers, offering half smiles, but looking at Ariana with disdain and tension. Each step, each gesture from Brittany became data. Every passenger who raised a phone to record was noted. Ariana understood that justice would be restored, but only the right way, through silence, through quiet strength, through superior intelligence. A passenger whispered, "She's just an ordinary passenger." Ariana heard but didn't react. True strength doesn't retaliate. It allows the oppressor to reveal their own nature. Brittany didn't realize she had stepped into a game she was destined to lose, though the eruption of power was still minutes away. Ariana slowly moved her backpack, slid the torn boarding pass into the front pocket, her eyes still fixed on Brittany. She didn't flinch, didn't show a trace of tension, only silent observation and calculation. The cabin remained heavy with silence, passengers watching phones still raised discreetly. Every small movement Ariana made held weight. Every action, every word, every glance was evidence. She inhaled eyes, shifting toward the window. The New York afternoon sky was dyed in shades of sunset. The plane she owned, the one Brittany thought she controlled, was about to take off. Ariana knew the slap hadn't happened yet, but it was close. And when it landed, everyone would witness real power. Ariana gently placed her feet on the floor, steady. Every detail she saw, white passengers raising eyebrows, lowering their heads, recording with phones. Brittany clenching her fists stiff. Carlos standing nearby with worry in his eyes. All were part of the build-up to what was coming. Her silence was dense, drawn tight like a wire, and power was about to erupt from that absolute calm. She didn't speak, didn't yell, didn't react. Her strength was in her silence. Quiet observation. Quiet preparation. Every move Brittany made, every prejudiced glance, was being etched into Ariana's memory. She knew this very moment would become evidence for justice and for real power. Carlos set the water bottle down beside her, his eyes never leaving Brittany. Ariana nodded, saying nothing. The tension was climbing. Brittany believed she was winning. But in truth, she was crafting the very blow that would mark her defeat. The cabin remained still, heavy light glinting off the leather seats and Ariana's hand. Everything moved slowly, but with certainty, like the final stillness before an earthquake. Ariana inhaled deeply, her eyes cold. Everything was within her control. Her power was quiet, but untouchable. She wasn't a victim. She was the one orchestrating the game. Brittany didn't realize it. She thought she held the upper hand, but in fact, she was stepping into the very crack that would cause her downfall. The atmosphere in the cabin was stretched tight. Every passenger, every crew member, every glance, every breath played a part in the tension-filled symphony Ariana was conducting. Silent power, piercing silence. Ariana's unblinking gaze seemed to say, "Everything will be put back in its rightful place. And when the time comes, I will be the one to restore order." She lifted her backpack, placed the torn boarding pass in her hand, her eyes still locked on Brittany. The cabin was heavy, every passenger quiet. Silent power waiting to explode. The slap hadn't landed yet, but everyone could feel the storm coming. Ariana wasn't afraid. She was watching. She was recording. She was preparing for her power to rise. Everything was silent. Everything was still. But each beat, each motion, each glance foreshadowed a storm. Brittany didn't know she had stepped into a battle that would shift the cabin, the airline, and the very structure of power. The slap would come, power would reveal itself, and when it did, everyone would know who truly held control. Ariana closed her eyes for a second. Inhaled, calm, strong. The tension surged. The cabin remained still. Brittany had no idea what was coming. Power was quiet, preparing to burst. The slap was coming, but not yet. It would be thunder, shaking the entire cabin, and everyone would see Ariana Carter was no ordinary passenger. She was the one holding all the power. Brittany took a deep breath, trying to maintain control, but her body was wound tight like a drawn bow. Ariana didn't move, her eyes sharp as blades scanning the cabin. Every passenger watched closely, phones raised discreetly, eyes tense and curious. Ariana could feel every step Brittany took, every motion, every prejudiced glance, every silence from those around her. The space felt like a pressure chamber, where every breath carried the weight of injustice. "You must move immediately," Brittany stressed, trying to prolong her authority under all those watching eyes. Ariana simply placed her hand on the tray table, looking directly into hers. Power radiated from her in silence, no words needed, but overwhelming and commanding. Every move Ariana made was calculated like a scanner, logging every piece of evidence, every detail in preparation for the moment the power dynamic would shift. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, his eyes full of concern but restraint. He understood clearly one wrong move could break order, but Ariana was no victim. She was the one directing the game. Brittany believed she was in control, but Ariana was observing, preparing a counterstrike. The cabin was tight with tension. Every inch of movement measured passengers' heartbeats accelerating. Brittany stepped closer, her voice raised sharp as a knife. "I told you to go to the back. Now." Ariana didn't flinch. She held the torn boarding pass, smoothing it out like examining evidence. Passengers watched, some lowering their heads, others subtly recording with their phones. Carlos placed a bottle of water in Ariana's hand, his eyes sending a silent message. Ariana nodded slightly, her gaze still cold. Her breath controlled her heartbeat, slow but taut. The rhythm of the cabin intensified. Brittany, now irritated, moved quickly, her gaze slicing toward Ariana, trying to force her into submission. Ariana noticed everything, the passengers' eyes. Brittany's stance, the smirks of disdain, the discreet cameras. She said nothing but that silence was strength. The cabin pulsed with pressure, light glinting off leather seats, and Ariana's poised hand exposing every trace of injustice. Ariana placed her backpack down her eyes, fixed on Brittany, capturing every move, every word, preparing for the moment power would rise. Brittany thought she was winning, but she had walked into a trap. Every passenger watched, not fully understanding, only sensing tension, radiating like an electric current throughout the cabin. Every move, every glance from Ariana was being analyzed, remembered, calculated. Brittany raised her voice. "You're disturbing everyone." Ariana remained calm, but inside a slow, burning fire spread. Quiet yet steady power. The cabin was silent, tense, to the point where even breaths sounded like drum beats. Ariana picked up the torn boarding pass, smoothed the edges, her eyes never leaving Brittany. She was preparing for each next move, each response. Brittany didn't realize she was stepping into defeat. The more pressure she applied, the calmer Ariana grew, every second increasing the intensity, like a suspenseful score building toward a crescendo. Carlos stood nearby, watching every detail. He knew when the power shifted, everything would reverse. Brittany didn't realize she was about to lose the upper hand, and the cabin would witness what real authority looked like. Ariana didn't smile, didn't yell, just stood still, her eyes cold, every movement calculated like a flawless strategy. A passenger whispered, "She's definitely trying to hold on to that seat." Ariana heard it but didn't respond. She understood that real power isn't in arguing, it's in observation and waiting for the moment to overturn everything. Brittany stepped even closer, her voice tight with tension. "Go." "Right now." Ariana stayed silent, her hand resting lightly on her backpack, eyes locked on Brittany. The cabin was stretched taut, passengers mute phones filming, everything quietly accelerated. Tension surged. Every step Brittany took, every gesture, every word was logged. Ariana was ready. The cabin had become a stage for injustice, but also the place where power was about to erupt. The more contempt Brittany showed, the calmer Ariana remained. Every look, every action would become evidence for the coming moment of peak power. Ariana took a deep breath, her heartbeat, steady eyes cold. Power, silent and contained, was building. Brittany believed she held control, but in truth she was signing her own defeat. The cabin was silent. Passengers could feel it, though none understood completely. Everything was on the verge of explosion. The slap was near, but Ariana still held full command, ready to reverse the board, to make the cabin and the entire airline witness the true strength of a woman who had been oppressed but would never submit. Brittany froze, her hand suspended mid-air, her eyes vacant as Hua realized the woman standing before her was not just another passenger. Ariana Carter remained upright, her posture firm, her eyes sharp as steel, her breathing steady, yet charged with energy, staring straight at Brittany. The cabin fell silent. Every gaze was locked on this moment. Every passenger could feel the shift in power approaching. Ariana gently raised her hand, placed the torn boarding pass on the tray table, smoothing each edge, as if documenting every injustice. Brittany blinked, trying to reclaim her false sense of confidence, but her body stiffened, no longer able to command the air around her. Every movement from Ariana was a silent command, every glance a test controlling every current in the cabin. Carlos Rivera stepped forward, placing a bottle of water in Ariana's hand, his eyes filled with worry, but aware she needed no help. Ariana nodded without speaking. Her power didn't lie in shouting or aggression, but in silent observation and waiting for the exact moment to strike. The more Brittany pushed the calmer, Ariana became the tension rising like the steady drumbeat before a storm. Ariana inhaled deeply, her gaze sweeping across the cabin, recording every passenger, every crew member, every movement, every glance. Every detail was data preparation for the moment she would expose the truth. Brittany thought she was winning, but in reality, she had just signed her own defeat with the very authority she thought was absolute. Each passenger could feel the growing tension phones subtly raised to capture the scene. Ariana didn't react to any discriminatory remarks. She didn't show anger, didn't flare up. Her real power was quiet, piercing, and ready to rise at the perfect moment. A passenger whispered, "Who is she to stay so calm like that?" Ariana didn't respond, only kept her piercing gaze, maintaining absolute control over the rhythm of the cabin. Brittany began to tremble, overwhelmed by an invisible pressure she could no longer contain. Every accusation, every oppressive action, every scornful look now mirrored back at her like a reflection of injustice. Ariana stood her steps slow and steady, like a current of electricity passing through the cabin. Brittany stepped back, eyes wide, realizing she had lost. There was no way back. Ariana walked through the cabin, her cold gaze sweeping over every passenger, each of them witnessing the presence of true power. Every step she took was a statement she was the owner of the airline, the one who set the new order, and any abuse of power would not be tolerated. Carlos followed at a respectful distance. Ariana didn't need assistance. Her strength came from resolve, observation, and unmatched intellect. Brittany remained frozen, her eyes vacant. The surrounding rows were silent, and every passenger understood the reversal of power, the one they assumed to be weak, was now clearly in control. Ariana turned her eyes sharp, as blades locking onto Brittany. Her voice rang out, calm but powerful. "Your slap can't erase the truth. I am the CEO. I own this airline, and every act of injustice will be recorded and held accountable." The cabin held its breath. Brittany trembled, unable to form a response. Ariana picked up the boarding pass, scanned the cabin once more. Not a word more, only her eyes and her stance conveyed everything. Every passenger understood this wasn't just a personal matter. It was a powerful statement about justice, power, and responsibility. Brittany was removed. The cabin hushed, and Ariana's strength had made it clear. Real power doesn't come from titles or force, but from the ability to stay calm, to observe, and to expose the truth when the moment is right. The plane took off. The tension that once gripped the cabin began to ease, but every passenger carried in their eyes the image of a woman who stood firm in the face of injustice, who transformed humiliation into authority, and turned a moment of chaos into a declaration of justice, dignity, and quiet, unshakable power. Ariana sat down, her eyes gazing out the window. The New York sky was bathed in golden twilight. The cabin had become a witness to a profound lesson in fairness. Brittany knew she had lost. The passengers now understood that power can reside in the one most underestimated. And Ariana Carter, calm, cold, in total control, had turned a humiliating slap into an undeniable victory, proving that no matter how subtle injustice may be, it will be revealed and it will be answered. Ariana sat back down, her hand resting lightly on her backpack, her gaze still cold as steel. Carlos stood nearby, silent, but carefully observing each passenger's reaction. Brittany had been removed, standing outside the cabin, her eyes trembling, though she still tried to appear composed. The cabin was now steeped in a heavy atmosphere. Every passenger recognized that the power had shifted. All eyes were now on Ariana, the woman who had been dismissed as invisible at the beginning of the flight, now transformed into the undeniable center of authority. Her identity as Ariana, the CEO and owner of the airline, had yet to be revealed. She knew that exposing it at the right moment would have the greatest impact. Ariana said nothing, but every gesture, every glance, every breath she took sent a clear message. Every unjust act would be documented, every bias exposed. Carlos approached, offering her a cold towel for the sting on her cheek. But Ariana needed no aid. Her strength lay in absolute calm, in her ability to control every detail, every move Brittany made, every ripple of reaction within the cabin. Brittany tried to meet her eyes, searching for a flicker of fear or panic, but found only silence, sharp and unyielding. Ariana took a deep breath, her mind scanning the cabin, who was filming, who was whispering, who was hesitating. Every motion, every look, every sound was data part of her preparation for the next move. Brittany believed she was in control, but in truth, she had stepped into the silent power trap Ariana had set the moment she boarded the plane. Every passenger could feel the reversal. Those who once saw Ariana as ordinary now saw her as a quiet force, unshakable. Her silence became psychological pressure. The more Brittany forced her, the more unyielding Ariana became, and the tension in the air thickened. Every wrongful act was noted, every discriminatory move destined to be punished. Ariana rose, walking slowly through the cabin, her eyes locked on Brittany. Each step was measured and intentional. The cabin was taut like a wire. Passengers' frozen phones lifted silently to record. Brittany trembled, unsure how to respond. The balance of power had shifted, though it had not yet erupted fully. Ariana controlled every breath in the space, every response, every gaze. She turned her eyes sharp as a blade, and her voice rang out calm but powerful. Every unjust act will be recorded. I am the CEO. I own this airline, and any abuse of power will be held accountable. The cabin was silent. Brittany had no words. Every passenger witnessed the strength of silence, of true power that required no shouting or show of force. Ariana returned to her seat, her eyes sweeping the entire cabin. She didn't speak, again didn't posture, but the message was clear. Power does not lie in titles or volume. It lives in total control, in observation, in recording, and in knowing the perfect time to expose the truth. Brittany had been completely defeated. The cabin remained still, and every passenger now understood the one once seen as powerless had become the one who controlled it all. The plane took off. Ariana sat calmly, her gaze fixed on the window, the sky bathed in golden twilight. The cabin had become a witness to a lesson in justice and authority, no matter how subtle injustice can be exposed, and those who rise quietly, but with conviction, will become the ones in command. Ariana's strength was not loud, but it was immovable. She transformed a humiliating slap into a symbol of triumph, proving that prejudice and oppression will never outweigh silent, absolute power. Ariana remained seated, her eyes fixed on Brittany, her gaze cold as steel, not a single word escaping her lips. The cabin was blanketed in heavy silence, every passenger feeling the tension ripple through the air. Brittany stood just a few steps away, her body rigid, her eyes unsettled, as she tried to appear firm, unaware that power had already completely shifted. Every movement Ariana made, from the way she placed her hand on her backpack, to the way she adjusted her torn boarding pass, and even her breathing was calculated, preparing for the next move, the moment of eruption that would expose all prejudice. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, his eyes tracking everything silent yet steady. He knew that any rash action could disrupt the fragile order of the cabin, but Ariana was no victim. She was the one orchestrating the scene, controlling every element with absolute calm. Brittany stepped closer, her voice sharp, trying to force Ariana to stand, but Ariana remained composed. Every gesture Brittany made was observed, analyzed, and mentally recorded by Ariana. The cabin was stretched tight, like a wire light reflecting off leather seats, off the backpack, off Ariana's hand. Everything becoming evidence of quiet, yet unshakable power. A passenger discreetly lifted their phone to record, but Ariana paid them no attention. She only observed Brittany, noting her eyes, her posture, her voice, every discriminatory move. The tension continued to rise. Passengers' heartbeats quickened, time itself seemed to stretch. Brittany believed she still controlled the situation, but Ariana had already seized that control, only waiting for the perfect moment to expose the truth. Ariana rose, walking slowly, steadily down the aisle. Each step was a silent declaration of authority. She wasn't afraid, wasn't angry, wasn't reactive, only walking with absolute confidence. Brittany faltered her eyes, filled with confusion. Passengers witnessed the reversal of power. The one once seen as vulnerable was now in charge of the entire situation. The cabin was so tense that every breath, every footstep sounded like a warning drum for the approaching storm. Carlos followed at a respectful distance, his presence supportive yet unobtrusive. Ariana needed no help. Her strength came from observation recording and total control. The more Brittany pushed, the calmer Ariana became. With each rise in tension, every misstep was logged. The cabin was silent, but the psychological pressure was immense. Everyone could sense that power had clearly shifted to Ariana. She turned to Brittany, her eyes sharp as blades, her voice calm, yet resonant. Every act of injustice will be documented. I am the CEO. I own this airline. All forms of prejudice and abuse of power will face consequences. The cabin held its breath. Brittany trembled, unable to respond. Every eye was on Ariana, recognizing that true power rested with her. Ariana returned to her seat, her eyes sweeping across the cabin. She said nothing more, but the message was undeniable. Power does not lie in titles or volume. It lies in the ability to maintain control, to observe, to record, and to choose the exact moment to reveal the truth. Brittany had been utterly defeated. The cabin was still, and every passenger now understood the person, once dismissed, could be the one who holds all the power. The plane lifted off. Ariana sat quietly, her gaze out the window, the New York evening bathed in golden light. The cabin had become a classroom, teaching a profound lesson on justice and authority, that even the most subtle injustice can and will be exposed. The one who rises quietly but firmly becomes the one in control. Ariana's power was never loud, but it was absolute. She turned a humiliating slap into a symbol of victory, proving that prejudice and oppression can never outlast calm observation and true strength. Ariana sat in the economy seat, her eyes fixed on Brittany Cole. Every passenger could sense the tension spreading through the cabin, though none fully grasped where true power now resided. Brittany stood just a few steps away, her body rigid, her blinking eyes full of confusion as she tried to maintain a facade of authority. The cabin was strung tight like a wire light, reflecting off leather seats, off Ariana's hand, off the torn boarding pass, everything bearing witness to a confrontation whose balance of power had already shifted. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, his eyes tense, yet silent. He understood that a single impulsive move could disrupt the cabin's fragile order, but Ariana was not a victim. She was the one directing this entire encounter, controlling every detail with absolute composure. Brittany moved closer, her voice raised and sharp, trying to force Ariana to stand. But Ariana remained calm. Every one of Brittany's gestures was observed, analyzed, and mentally recorded. The cabin was silent heavy, every passenger feeling the weight of the pressure in each breath. Ariana picked up the boarding pass, smoothing its torn edge like she was examining a piece of evidence. Brittany trembled, trying to hold on to a sense of control, but her authority was gone. Ariana's silence became her strength, quiet, steady, and absolute. Every passenger saw the shift the woman once viewed as weak, now clearly commanded the room. Brittany took a step back, her eyes meeting Ariana's, but she dared not retaliate. She had walked into a trap of quiet power Ariana had set from the beginning. Carlos placed a bottle of water in Ariana's hand, his gaze offering silent support. Ariana gave a slight nod, not saying a word. Her strength was her unwavering calm, her command of the cabin space, and her readiness for the power shift that was about to erupt. Every gesture, every glance, every act was evidence. The more Brittany pushed, the more resolute Ariana became. The rising tension played like a suspenseful score nearing its crescendo. Ariana stood, walking slowly and steadily through the cabin, her eyes still locked on Brittany. Each step declared her power. No fear, no anger, just unwavering confidence. The cabin was so silent that every breath, every footstep echoed like a warning drum for the storm that was building. Brittany looked shaken, unsure how to respond. Passengers sat still, phones quietly recording, bearing witness to a profound transformation. The tension thickened. Ariana paused in the middle of the cabin, her eyes scanning every passenger, every flight attendant. Every detail was logged. Brittany tried to remain composed, but her body shook. Slowly, passengers began to understand. The one they thought weak was now in full control. The cabin became a stage for silent, absolute power. Ariana turned back her gaze, sharp as a blade, and her voice rang out calm but commanding. Every unjust act will be documented. I am the CEO. I own this airline. All forms of prejudice and abuse of power will be held accountable. The cabin went still. Brittany trembled, unable to respond. Every eye turned to Ariana, realizing that true power isn't in titles or volume, but in composure, observation, and the precise timing of truth. Ariana walked back to her seat, her eyes scanning the entire cabin. She said nothing more, but the message was unmistakable. Power lives in the ability to maintain control, to observe, to document, and to expose at the right moment. Brittany had been fully defeated. The cabin was silent, and every passenger now understood the person once seen as weak had become the center of power. The plane took off. Ariana sat still, her gaze out the window, the New York evening sky glowing gold. The cabin had just witnessed a lesson in justice and power, that even the subtlest injustices will be brought to light. The one who rises quietly but decisively becomes the one in control. Ariana's power was not loud, but it was unshakable. She had transformed a humiliating slap into a symbol of victory, proving that prejudice and oppression will never survive calm observation and true strength. Carlos stepped forward again, his eyes filled with respect. But Ariana needed only her gaze to deliver the message. No one could alter the outcome without her permission. Brittany had been removed from the cabin, her eyes vacant, her body stiff, knowing she had lost. Every passenger now saw it clearly. The woman they thought powerless had become the one in charge. The cabin was silent, but the message had already spread. Ariana turned back to the window, looking out at the orange-gold sky over New York. Sunlight cast across the leather seats across her hand, across the torn boarding pass. Everything had become evidence of quiet but immovable power. Brittany had lost control, and the passengers understood. True power doesn't come from shouting or aggression, but from composure, from watching, from documenting, and from choosing the right moment to reveal the truth. Ariana's silence created undeniable pressure. Brittany knew she had been defeated, and the cabin recognized that power had changed hands. Every passenger had witnessed Ariana's strength, absorbing the lesson about justice and authority, that even the most subtle forms of injustice will be exposed, and the one who rises quietly and resolutely becomes the center of control, capable of shattering every false assumption. Ariana took a deep breath, her breathing calm, her eyes still razor-sharp. She didn't need words, didn't need to raise her voice. Every action, every glance, every gesture was evidence. Her power was silent, but unshakable. Brittany stood outside the cabin, trembling, fully aware of her defeat. The cabin remained still, but everyone could feel it. Ariana Carter, silent yet absolute, had turned humiliation into power, affirming that justice, authority, and equality will always exist, waiting only for someone strong enough to bring them to light. Ariana rose, taking slow yet firm steps through the cabin. Every passenger's gaze followed her, sensing clearly that a shift in power was unfolding. Brittany Cole still tried to maintain a facade of composure, but her body trembled, her eyes widened, as she realized she no longer controlled the energy in the cabin. Every passenger understood the reversal. The one once perceived as powerless was now commanding the entire situation. The cabin was taut like a stretched wire, golden light filtering through the windows, glinting off Ariana's hand, and the torn boarding pass, every detail a testament to quiet but absolute authority. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, watching Ariana closely, his expression tense, yet composed. He understood that one rash move could destabilize the cabin, but Ariana was no victim. She was the one leading the game, controlling every detail with unwavering calm. Brittany moved forward, trying to force Ariana to stand, but Ariana remained silent, her gaze sharp as a blade, sweeping the cabin and noting every move, every look, every reaction. Her strength was rooted in stillness and flawless observation. Ariana gently lifted the boarding pass, smoothing its edges as if analyzing evidence. Brittany tried to assert pressure, but Ariana showed no fear. Every one of Brittany's actions was being mentally recorded, analyzed, and evaluated. The cabin felt heavy, each passenger aware of the escalating tension. Brittany believed she was in control, but in truth, Ariana had already claimed silent dominance. A passenger discreetly raised their phone to record their eyes filled with curiosity, but Ariana didn't need to look. Her focus was locked on Brittany, studying every facial expression, every gesture, every word. The tension swelled like a dramatic score, each beat signaling a coming eruption of power. The more Brittany pressed, the calmer Ariana became. Every wrongful word, every discriminatory move was etched into her sharp memory, preparing for the next move. Ariana walked through the cabin, her eyes scanning the entire space. Every passenger and crew member became part of a larger power strategy. Brittany trembled, seeking a trace of fear or panic in Ariana's eyes, but received only cold silence and wordless authority. The cabin was silent, phones raised to record every passenger witnessing the quiet rise of dominance. Carlos followed, at a respectful distance, his gaze fixed on Ariana. She needed no assistance. Her power came from observing, recording, and commanding every detail. The more Brittany tried to assert control, the more composed Ariana remained. Tension grew with every breath, every misstep captured. The cabin was still, yet the psychological weight bore down on every soul inside. Power had clearly shifted. Ariana stopped in the middle of the cabin, her eyes fixed on Brittany, and her voice rang out calm, yet forceful. "Every act of injustice will be recorded. I am the CEO. I own this airline. Every act of prejudice, every abuse of power will be held accountable." The cabin fell into complete silence. Brittany trembled, unable to respond. Every gaze turned to Ariana, realizing that true power didn't reside in shouting or aggression, but in composure, observation, and the precision of truth revealed at the right moment. Ariana returned to her seat, her eyes sweeping the cabin. She spoke no more, but her message was undeniable. Power resides in total control, in recording every behavior, and in choosing the moment to expose it. Brittany was completely defeated. The cabin was silent, every passenger now fully aware the person once seen as weak had become the undeniable center of power. Every unjust act, every word of prejudice had no place against her silent but resolute force. The plane took off. Ariana sat still, her eyes gazing out the window, the evening sky over New York bathed in gold. The cabin had just witnessed a lesson in justice and authority. Even the most subtle injustice would be brought into the light. Those who rise quietly but firmly become the ones who shape the course. Ariana's power was not loud, but it was unshakable. She had turned a humiliating slap into a symbol of victory, affirming that prejudice and oppression cannot endure against composure, awareness, and real strength. Carlos approached with quiet respect, but Ariana needed only a glance to convey the message no outcome would change without her consent. Brittany was removed from the cabin, her eyes vacant, her body frozen, fully aware of her defeat. Every passenger now understood the one they once underestimated was now the one in control. The cabin was quiet, but the message had already echoed through every corner. Ariana turned to the window, watching the sky over New York, painted in golden amber. Sunlight hit the leather seats her hand and the torn boarding pass. Everything became evidence of quiet, yet undeniable power. Brittany had lost all control, and the passengers understood that true power doesn't come from yelling or force, but from calm observation, recording, and precision. Ariana's silence created absolute pressure. Brittany knew she had failed, and the cabin acknowledged the shift in control. Every passenger had witnessed Ariana's strength, absorbing a lesson in justice and power that even the most refined injustice would eventually be exposed, and the one who rises quietly but firmly becomes the one who redefines the order and dismantles every assumption. Ariana took a deep breath, her rhythm calm, her eyes still razor-sharp. She needed no words, no raised voice. Every action, every glance, every gesture was evidence. Her power was silent, but unshakable. Brittany stood outside the cabin, trembling, aware of her total defeat. The cabin remained silent, but everyone inside could feel it. Ariana Carter, quiet yet absolute, had turned humiliation into power, proving that justice, authority, and equality have always existed, merely waiting for someone strong enough to reveal them. Every passenger remained silent, their eyes fixed on Ariana, knowing this was no ordinary flight. It was a lesson in power, justice, and resolve. Brittany no longer held control. The cabin had just witnessed a power shift they would never forget. Ariana sat upright, her eyes cold, and from a seemingly ordinary seat, she had turned the cabin into a living testament to the force of quiet, unshakable justice. The plane ascended into high clouds, golden evening light trailing behind the wings, and the cabin remained still. Every passenger knew they had just witnessed an invisible but total transformation of power. Ariana Carter, through calm observation and recording, had turned personal humiliation into a triumph of justice, had transformed oppression into a masterclass in strength, and had proven that no act of injustice, however subtle, can survive against true resolve, intellect, and undeniable authority. Understood. I'll translate this with the exact style and constraints you've specified. Please hold on while I process the full voice-over script. Ariana Carter sat upright in her economy seat, her eyes sharp as steel sweeping across the cabin. Brittany Cole, once a confident flight attendant, now stood frozen hands, trembling eyes wide as she realized she had lost control. The cabin was so silent that every breath, every heartbeat of the passengers sounded like a drum roll, marking a shift in power. Ariana didn't need to shout, didn't need aggression. Her authority radiated through absolute calm, her ability to observe and register every detail. Every move Brittany made, every prejudiced glance, every sigh from the passengers, all were under Ariana's control. Carlos Rivera stood nearby, his eyes tense, yet restrained. He knew any rash action could disrupt the cabin's order, but Ariana was no victim. She was the one leading the game, orchestrating every moment with unshakable composure. Brittany moved forward, her voice sharp, trying to force Ariana to stand. But she remained motionless. Every gesture, every look, every tone Brittany used was being recorded, analyzed, and prepared for what came next, the moment when true power would be exposed. The cabin was heavy with tension, light reflecting off leather seats, her backpack, the torn boarding pass, each detail a silent witness to her steady, unyielding strength. Ariana stood up, walked slowly but purposefully through the aisle. Each step was a declaration. She controlled this space, she decided the outcome. Brittany stepped back, confused and unable to respond. Every passenger saw the shift in power. The one they thought weak was now in command. The cabin was drawn tight like a wire, every breath and footstep echoing like a drumbeat, announcing the coming storm. Carlos followed at a respectful distance, his gaze quietly supportive. Ariana didn't need words, didn't need assistance. Her strength came from observing, recording, and knowing precisely when to reveal the truth. Brittany tried to regain control, but Ariana's calm, icy stare made her falter. The cabin was silent. Phones raised in secret. Every passenger witnessed the emergence of true authority. Ariana didn't react, didn't rage, just observed. Every heartbeat, every breath, every twitch was captured. Her power was silence, invisible but undeniable, quietly pushing Brittany into inevitable defeat. Every movement, every glance, every word became evidence for the moment power would peak. Ariana returned to her seat, eyes still scanning the cabin. Brittany stood frozen, her body rigid. Every passenger now saw that the woman once deemed powerless had become the center of control. The cabin was silent, but the message had already spread. Abuse of power and prejudice would be met head-on. Every action Brittany had taken, from her voice to her glare, was now proof of her failure. The plane took off the cabin, bathed in warm afternoon light. Ariana looked out the window, the sky soaked in golden sunset. Light shimmered off the leather seats her hand, and the torn boarding pass, each detail quietly witnessing this power shift. Brittany had completely lost control, and the passengers could feel Ariana's quiet, yet unbreakable presence. She had turned a humiliating slap into a symbol of triumph, proving that injustice, bias, and oppression cannot stand against calm awareness and true power. Ariana picked up the boarding pass, gently smoothing it, her eyes sharp as a blade. Every passenger recognized her strength, no shouting, no aggression, only total control, a piercing gaze, the discipline to observe, and the timing to unveil truth. Brittany was removed from the cabin, trembling, knowing she had utterly lost. The cabin was still, but the message of power had spread. Every act of oppression would have consequences. Ariana sat back down, eyes fixed on the New York sky. The cabin had just received a lesson in justice and authority. Those who rise quietly but firmly become the ones who command, turning humiliation into power and oppression into a living lesson. Carlos approached again, his eyes respectful, but Ariana needed no help. Her power came from her ability to observe, to analyze, and to choose the moment truth would be revealed. Brittany trembled. The passengers understood the shift was complete. The cabin was silent, but everyone knew Ariana Carter was no ordinary passenger. She held full command. Ariana stood once more, walking through the aisle, her eyes touching every passenger, every crew member. Her every move radiated quiet power. Brittany stared at her, fully defeated, stripped of any remaining authority. The cabin stayed quiet, but everyone could feel the shift. Ariana inhaled deeply, her breath steady, her gaze, ice cold and in complete control. Every unjust act, every biased word would be remembered and answered. She looked out the window, the sky outside turning deep amber. Golden rays illuminated the cabin, the seats her hand, and the torn boarding pass. Each detail stood as evidence of power that spoke no words but could not be shaken. Brittany was completely defeated, the cabin silent, yet every passenger now understood this truth. No matter how discreet, injustice will always be exposed, and the one who rises quietly, yet with resolve, becomes the center of authority. The plane soared higher, evening light flooding over the passengers. Ariana sat back, her eyes on the sky, calm but powerful. She had turned humiliation into power, oppression into a lesson, proving that justice, authority, and equality exist wherever someone strong enough chooses to bring them to light. The cabin was quiet, but Ariana's presence had filled it with purpose. The lesson of fairness and quiet strength had been carved into every gaze around her. Every passenger understood that from this moment on, bias and oppression would find no foothold in this cabin, and wherever Ariana appeared, she would turn shame and injustice into living proof of authority, calm and fairness. Brittany looked at her trembling, stripped of all power, and every passenger bore witness. The one they thought powerless was now the one in control, transforming a moment of humiliation into a symbol of justice, power, and human dignity. From the perspective of an expert in justice and systemic power, Ariana Carter's story is not merely a personal incident, but a clear testament to how injustice, prejudice, and racial discrimination continue to infiltrate spaces that are supposed to be safe, from airplane cabins to corridors of authority. True power does not lie in titles or wealth, but in the ability to observe, remain resolute, and use one's influence to expose and correct what is unjust. When one individual is brave enough to stand up, the entire system is forced to reckon with itself. If you believe that justice must be protected through courageous action, hit like and subscribe to help spread this story. And leave a comment with the phrase, "Stand up," to show that you support justice and the quiet, unwavering power that brings real change.